Welcome back to Garden Talk, brought to you by the Penn State Erie County Extension Master Gardeners. I'm your host for today, Mike Bailey. And again, Ellen's in the wings waiting for us as soon as the coronavirus quarantine lifts. But she is in very good health. Again, I keep mentioning that to reassure everybody that she is healthy. And last few times we've talked about starting seeds on the inside. And I think I've given you, hopefully not too much information. But now, one of the important things if you're going to start seeds on the inside is that those plants have to be hardened off. Now, when plants are grown on the inside, what they don't develop is that they don't develop a layer of what's called cutin, which is a layer of, material cells over the surface of the leaf that protects those leaves from drying out from sun and rain and wind. And so these plants have to be gradually introduced to the outside world, if you will, because that cutin layer will develop. Okay, but you got to give it a few days to do that. And what you don't want to do is take this newborn baby, if you will, and take it outside and burn it. And I've seen some terrible examples of this. Especially was disappointing when it happened at some of the school gardens that we work with, where kids have, nursed plants along for 6, 7, 8 weeks, and then they took them out and put them in this nice warm location, and somebody forgot about them, and for more than a little bit of time, and they went out and got them a little bit later, and they're basically fried. Okay, the leaves, they're all withered up, and the leaves are burned and stuff like that. It's really disheartening. So you got to take this into consideration. Now, I'm going to share with you my approach. And yours doesn't have to be this way, but I suspect that you're looking for some kind of guidelines. Okay, fine. What could or should we do? First of all, this, for me, I do this over a period of about 5 to 7 days. And I do it after the temperatures on the outside, are above 50, ideally closer to 60, and also when it's not when it's pouring rain, and not when there's a strong wind. Okay, these things are small, they're very tender. Okay, and you have to take care of them. So, on day one, what do I do? Okay, for about 4 or 5 hours on that day one, I'll take them outside the tray's outside, and I'll put them in a shady location that's going to stay shady for that whole period of time. Okay, that allows them to start acclimating to the temperature of the outside. Then on day two, again, I'll take them outside, but this time I might put them in some filtered light. And you have to be careful about filtered light. What I do, I take them out, put them under a tree, because usually there's some leaves on the trees by then, and that works. But the sun moves up there, and in your filtered area, kind of moves also with it. So you might have to go out and adjust the location, okay, during that particular period of time. On day three, I increase that filtered light exposure to probably maybe about 5 or 6 hours, okay, as they're starting to get used to this. But I also pay attention to the plants as I'm going through this. If it looks like they're starting to dry out too much, maybe I'm getting a little, dryness on the edge, they're turning brown, or they're getting a little pale, I'll back off, okay, and say, okay, fine, these plants aren't ready, or I've exposed them to too much. Or maybe didn't have them moist enough when I set them outside. It's very important that tray has some moisture in it when you set it outside, because things will dry. Those little cells, plastic cells, they'll dry out in a hurry if that's what you're using. And some other things, if you're using some kind of a peat moss cell or planter, or even some pots that you made out of newspaper, those things will dry out in a hurry. So you got to make sure that your plants aren't going to wilt on you. On day 4, I go out about a couple hours of direct sunlight, and along with some filtered 3 or 4 hours of filtered light. Okay, after that, day 5, I go out and I'm about 3 to 4 hours of direct sun. Okay, followed by another 4 or 5 hours of some filtered light. And you'll get the hang of this. It'll make sense, okay? You pay attention to the plants. Pay attention to how much they're drying out, and paying attention to their coloring to make sure that they're not getting bleached out by the sunlight. And because if it is, you'll have to back off a little bit. I guess the other thing is, if the plants are starting to look real pale, you know, it might be a sign that you might need a little bit of fertilizer. Okay, and what you're going to do in that particular situation is that you're going to use some liquid fertilizer that's, diluted to half strength. So, by the end of this fifth or sixth day of doing something like this, these plants should be pretty good for planting, into the garden. So, they'll tell you if you listen to them. Now, there's also probably a few other things that you need to watch out when you're doing this hardening off outside. Number one, don't let your plants become animal food. Those rabbits and chipmunks and other things and voles would be happy to taste the meal that you're setting out for them. And again, don't let them dry out. We already talked about that. Make sure that those trays are nice and moist before you set them out. Now, if they do wilt, okay, get them out of the sunlight, give them some moisture, and allow them to kind of absorb that moisture sitting in the shade. And again, watch the coloring of those leaves. If they're starting to get a little bit too bleached out, okay, back them off on the sun exposure, and or consider that gentle fertilizer application. And pay attention to the plants. Watch the edges of those leaves, and this should work out perfectly fine for you. But please don't try to skip over this step of plants that you've grown on the inside. It's very important. Don't lose your babies. Thank you now.